Welcome once again to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
I'm Gary.
So, kind of a heavy conversation for this episode. Wanted to talk about addiction. And every time I drive over here, I'm always in thought about what our subject matter is going to be. Believe it or not, we do not have this all mapped out on a spreadsheet. Maybe we should.
Shocker.
And so, kind of on the fly, thinking about the topics that we're most curious about, the things that impact us. And so, just coming over here, there was a young man who was clearly in the throes of addiction on the street corner, kind of stumbling through traffic, had parked, out in that area to solicit for change and dollars at the intersection. And this is something that sadly we're seeing in an increasing measure in our city, and I know cities across the country. I don't know about any other country and how addiction is working there. I've heard a number of podcasts about how different European nations are dealing with it, but generally speaking, all my experience is concentrated here in my city, or some travels to Colorado Springs or Denver or other major cities, and just what I'm observing. But certainly, I don't think anybody can argue that there are more and more and more people that are out soliciting, that are deep in the throes of addiction. We're seeing more camping sites. We're seeing more just littering of the highways of both tents and garbage. And everyone's asking the question what to do about it. And I've been thinking a lot about generalizing addiction and how that can be dangerous. And as this whole narrative through all of these podcasts have gone, how do we be curious rather than take a posture of judgment? And it's real easy to say, well, you're an addict, you got what you deserve, or fill in the blank with whatever the rest of your statement is that you have, that narrative you have playing it in your own head. But I am realizing, based on a dear family friend whose son got caught up in fentanyl, somebody I had known since a very early age. I'd known him as a delightful child. I knew him as an awkward teenager. I knew him as a young man. And one thing led to another, and now he's one of those guys, right, battling fentanyl. And I watch the deterioration. I watch his mother, who I can cry with her all the time over this topic. It's become very personal, right? And I think your expression to me a number of times and to our audience has been, it's hard to judge somebody once you get to know them, or it's hard to hate somebody when you get to know them. And that certainly is the case with addiction. And I would say many, many people know firsthand about addiction with whatever the vice is, because they've got it in their family, they themselves are struggling through it, or it's touched them in a very personal way.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult right now in our current society, in our current environment, to not be exposed to addiction, either in your immediate family, yourself, or for sure your extended family.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, I can't think of an extended family that I'm aware of that I know that isn't dealing with it.
Yeah.
I think that COVID is like pouring Miracle Grow on addictions and mental health issues. I think one of the big fallouts from COVID, and you don't see this being published a lot or talked about a lot. Sometimes you see parts of it if you look for it, but I think that's going to be one of the big fallouts of this in all age groups going forward. And I'm reminded, based on our subject of curiosity, not judgment, of the saying, don't judge someone because they sin differently than you do. I think we have to be very careful. In my experience, and that's all I know, that's all I can talk about with any authority, we all struggle with something. And whether that's labeled an addiction or not, whether you meet the clinical, psychological definition of an addiction or not, I think it's pretty hard to point your finger at someone and say, you are a loser, or you are an addict, or you are struggling with something, and I don't struggle with anything. I don't think that's true.
Right.
I'd love to talk to somebody where that's true. And I think that it's important to realize that in that we're dealing with people every day and relationships with others. And I think it's really important to understand, to be gentle with folks and to provide a lot of grace, because we don't know what other people's struggles are.
Right.
I think we can guess what other people's struggles are. I think we can assume that they have them, and that they manifest in different ways. I think it's really important, though, that we have an extra slice of grace to give out to folks, especially that we're not familiar with, or even ones that we do know and that we like, just because we should assume that they're struggling with something.
Mm-hmm. You know, this conversation could go in so many different directions, but my immediate thought right now is, how do we deal with the folks that are caught up in addiction that need help? Not the folks that are hiding their addiction, not the folks that are managing their own addiction or, pretending it's not there, but how do we help those that are actively in need of help? And that is another area where we have to exercise curiosity. And I will say, maybe prior to a few years ago, I might have thought, well, there is a solution that can fix this problem. But now, with the last number of years and the work I've been doing with a lot of different organizations that are in the trenches with folks caught in addiction, it has become more clear to me than ever that there is no one solution. And I'm even watching organizations kind of get up in arms against each other because they think they do it right and they think they do it right. And I think it's a both and, right? It's not an either or. And I was in a meeting probably not even 6 months ago where there was a number of leaders in the room, all representing different organizations that were helping people with addiction. So you've got one that is just a feeding program, no questions asked, here's all the food that you want. There's another that kind of has the expectation that we're going to help you when you hit rock bottom, but you have to hit rock bottom because until you get there, there's no hope for you to go back up. Then another group that says, well, we're there to provide a gentle landing. We know that, there's further to fall, but sometimes that gentle landing is what they need so that they know that there's people out there that care about them. And we want to kind of plant seeds of tenderness and care and compassion so that when they do hit rock bottom, they can come find us again. And I was listening to this dialogue and it got a little bit heated up between leaders. And there are those that feel very passionately about their stance, like, no, it has to be this way. And so exercising curiosity in this realm, whether from the perspective of, observing somebody or being in close relationship, or you yourself being in addiction, or the organization trying to help. And so it's a big, hairy mess.
There are myriad approaches and solutions. And there's a lot of very kind-hearted, well-motivated people trying to help. One thing I know, and that is what does not work, and that's judgment. In my experience, I have never seen judgment work to turn an addict's life around, to turn anybody that's in any kind of a vicious cycle or a spiral downward. I've never seen judgment work. Little known fact, the person who's in addiction, this should not be a little known fact because I think we were all at some levels of this, shame and judgment is already present within the person, and they're shaming, judging themselves. Yeah. They don't need you to pile on. That's not how helpful, that's not being helpful. I think in my experience, one thing that does work is being vulnerable and transparent with your own issues. I think nobody wants to hear, a sermon from a saint or, how perfect you are and how you should just do what they do.
Right.
That's the old story of, diagnose before you prescribe. It's going into your optometrist and she takes off her glasses and say, well, these work for me, they should work for you. That's not the way it works. Being transparent and vulnerable and saying, well, I struggle with this. I see some of these patterns emerging, and it scares me that I see them in you, would be a much gentler, and may not even be appropriate even in that situation, I think what you said earlier is really important, and that is there needs to be several different options available and several different ways when you're speaking with someone. And when you're talking to someone who's in the throes of addiction, making sure that the judgment is not present is step number one. After that, a heart that's motivated to help and to love and to be high support, high challenge when appropriate, but high support shown first seems to be something that works better than judgment.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to deviate too much into, the solutions that aren't working or the high level bureaucracy and the multiple millions of dollars that are spent every, given quarter on battling some of these problems in every given community. But I do want to just say it, vocalize it, that I think we as citizens of our community, whatever community you find yourself in, really need to take some time to think about, are we being asked to support a singular solution where all of our resources are being put into this one basket, and we're wanting, you guys over there, go ahead and fix that problem. You've taken all of our tax dollars and we expect results. I think we need to step back and say, if that is our expectation and if that is our line of thinking, we're setting ourselves up for some major disappointment.
Sure. Well, first of all, let's talk about the hard work of this. This is not easy.
Right.
As you said, there is not one size fits all solutions, and you can't just throw money at it.
Right.
And excuse me. So, what? When you ask the question, what is the solution? I think the answer is that there's many solutions and many approaches, but that it's going to take hard work, and it's going to have some element of individualized treatment, and it's going to have some something around one-on-one treatment. And whenever you say that, you think, okay, well, how do we scale that times the problem that's out there? And part of the issue is that we who are on the side of not being in a vicious cycle cannot just say, well, I'm going to give money to something, and that something is going to fix everybody who is in a vicious cycle, as we identify it on that day.
Right.
Whatever that is, whatever normal is. And I like the joke about the only normal I know is the dial selection on my washing machine. Because there is no normal, and some people can tread water for quite a while
Sure.
in certain areas, and that's fine for them. And we don't need to be judging that either. I think that it's important that we each have a role to play, and we each have a role to play within our families. We started out by saying that very few families aren't touched by this.
Right.
What can the family do, right, before it becomes the city has to take care of them, the police force has to take care of them, the social worker has to take care of them. What is our responsibility as individuals in helping with situations before they reach that point?
Well, as we tend to do on this whole episode or this whole series, is to start asking questions. And I think you have to tap into your community to ask those questions, and you have to be vulnerable. I mean, you've said that word a number of times today. Vulnerability is key. And I think, hiding the fact that your child has a drug addiction, or hiding the fact that you're struggling through a porn addiction, or fill in the blank through whatever it is that you're battling, doesn't do anybody any good. It maybe saves face for a season, but then it allows the issue to progress. And maybe it does become to a point where the family can't do it anymore because they have chosen not to ask their community for help, and they've chosen not to be vulnerable. So how do you start to ask those good questions? How do you find safe people to elicit answers from in order to see what might be done with your little circle of care around the person that you love? The other thing, I think, I can speak again, we can all speak from our own experiences. And I traditionally had been somebody that started formulating stories in my head, and based on very little fact. Right? Well, I'm guessing this behavior is a result of this. or this person is continuing to do this behavior that I loathe, and they don't love me enough to stop it. And so it's two-sided, right? I mean, we need to deal with the stuff that we're saying in our own heads and the stories that we're painting, because it instantly turns into a judgment about the person who's struggling, but then also not to be in this place of seclusion and hiding so that we're not vulnerable enough to reach out for help.
Yeah, being in denial is probably one of the worst places to be in. I'm not talking about a river.
Sure.
And you knew where I was going to go there.
Yeah.
But there's this principle called the ladder of inference, and using a very mundane example, Sally was late to this meeting by 5 minutes. Sally doesn't care about what we're talking about. And why is Sally even part of this team? Should she even be part of this company? Right? And you can climb that ladder of inference real fast,
yeah.
Especially if you don't like the person, right? Curiosity, not judgment. Getting to know somebody and knowing what Sally's going on. Sally may have been 5 minutes late because she was in a conversation that literally saved someone's sanity in the workplace that day. We don't know.
Yeah.
And again, curiosity, not judgment would say, if you're really concerned, so Sally, what kept you today? Why were you late? And Sally, that gives her the opportunity to say, well, I was in a conversation I really didn't feel was appropriate to end at that point, and I think it really helped this person out. Now she might say, I just didn't give a flip about this meeting, and I didn't want to be here anyway, and so, which is a whole different conversation to have.
Absolutely.
And maybe she shouldn't be in that meeting,
Sure.
right? And she's being forced by her boss to be.
She's climbed that ladder on her own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but the point is to understand that there is a ladder of inference, and that we often climb it ourselves, and we need to be careful of that and ask questions of ourselves. And if it's important that we know Sally's commitment to the team, then ask Sally about her commitment to the team.
Yeah.
Don't just assume it based on a small piece of possibly irrelevant data, or relevant in a different way.
And I think one point I want to say out loud is sometimes being curious can save a life.
Absolutely.
And I can think of a number of examples whether a person has, I'm going to say an unconfessed addiction to a substance that could lead to death, or if you are seeing signs that somebody is a victim of abuse, you being curious appropriatly could be the difference between life and death.
No question. Life and death, and or the next action that could lead to a vicious cycle leading towards a lot of pain, including death. And I think that's the key. And so, paying attention, being aware of what's going on around us, and seeing where people are struggling, and instead of saying, well, that person's struggling and, that's none of my business, and, I don't have time for that because I've got my own problems. That is absolutely a way to go. Is it the appropriate way for the situation? And are we just waiting for something bad to happen? Yeah. There's a great expression I learned from a Covey course at one time called "Unexpressed feelings never die. They just get buried alive and come forth in uglier ways later." I think that's true for a lot of things, including addictions, including signs that the people may be in trouble. We can absolutely ignore them and bury them.
Sure.
They will come forth later in uglier ways.
Well, and I don't know if it's fear. I don't know if it's just being very uncertain about what you might do. But if you elect not to be curious and instead just do a blanket judgment, it's a detriment to the person and it's a detriment to you, because, again, going back to the story we tell ourselves is, oh, she's got a bruise again. Why doesn't she leave her husband? Or, oh, so-and-so's late again. It's probably their darn son who, is just a worthless addict. And it's that snap judgment, or that turning of the way that we start to perceive one another, that just tears the fabric of our community apart.
No, that's right. And we all know people who have later on, we have found out, were in abusive relationships.
Yeah.
And I always ask myself, could I see it? Did I know? Were they so good at hiding it? Were there some cries for help? Were there some things I should have noticed? And I think those are very valid questions to ask ourselves, because we all have a responsibility in our society to our society and to the fellow travelers in that society. The people that we come up against, those are not accidental meetings and relationships.
Right.
And we might be the person who is that person's salvation. And we will never know if we don't ask questions.
Right. One of the things I've tried to do now is if I pull up to a street light and I see somebody on the corner, especially somebody in their 20s, that for all appearances seem healthy and capable of work, and they're begging for money, for me to avoid that snap judgment of, oh, they're just an addict, add the adjective at will, right? And to say, that's somebody's child, and that could be my child, and for me to pray for them. I mean, that's my best option in the moment, because I know handing a couple bucks out the window is likely not going to be beneficial, but for me also not to then start telling myself the story, or, if I've got an inkling like a couple bucks may buy a burger right now, then to not even, go with my normal course of judgment about not giving money. And so I hope I'm not coming across as doublespeak, but I guess I'm just saying, every moment is unique, every person is unique, and are we willing to take the time to be curious and to consider that they are a person caught in whatever they're caught in, and that they have a story, they have a background, they have a family. Whether or not they have healthy relationship is a whole nother issue, but they come from somewhere. They didn't just appear on the roadmap of our community and there's someone else's issue to deal with.
I think we all have a sense that we're part of something bigger, and that there's, you call it universal mind or God or higher power or whatever you're into. I think we all understand that we are part of a web of existence and life on this planet. And when in that situation, I have a deal with my higher power, who I choose to call God, that I look at the person in the eye, because that's part of the problem, is we don't look at people in the eye in our society. And then I get a very clear signal: give them $2, don't give them $2. And then I act on it, because that's my deal. If the thing is do it, then I do it, regardless of whether the light changes or not. And if it's no, then it's no. And so I think that, and that's my way of dealing with things, but you should be intentional of your own. I never do it because of this reason. And why is that reason? Why are you saying not do it? And are those old ideas that you should re-examine, or are those ideas based on your current values, your current situation, your current environment, and in the world in which we live?
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to intentionality and asking questions of ourselves.
Yep.
Why do I act this way?
Yeah.
And is that the way I want to be seen?
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I'm trying to work on right now is what is my purpose, and am I becoming the kind of person who lives that purpose? And it's all part of that. And so, am I the kind of person who gives $2 to somebody standing on the side of the road? My answer is maybe, depending on a process that I've come up with.
Sure.
But that's my deal. And we're all individuals, and we all need to come up with our own. Don't drift though. Don't just say, well, I've never done it, so I don't do it. Or I decided this 20 years ago that I would never do it, so I've never done it.
Right.
I think those are continuous questions that we should continue to ask ourselves to see where we are now, which is absolutely different than where we were before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, the key takeaway for me in this, and maybe this is going to bug people, that I always want to bring it down to a lesson, but that's just kind of how I operate. So be curious and not judgmental about me. It's just, asking tender questions, being willing to ask yourself some tender questions. Why do I think this way? What in my background has caused me to have this value system or this belief system? But then as you encounter somebody in addiction, to start asking some gentle questions. And maybe it starts internally, and then as you feel led, to ask them externally, because you never know if that question may help them escape or be saved from a dangerous situation, or have a life change.
And to me, it's kind of a three-phase process. Number one, do I care enough about this person to try to help them? Number one. If the answer is no, well, then work on that
Yeah.
until you are. And maybe you never are. Second is, if I want to help this person, does judgment work? And I can tell you that the answer is no. So given that, number three is, what can I do to show my own vulnerability, my own transparency, let them know that my life is not perfect either, and that I am literally concerned for them and caring for them, and then ask those gentle questions as they come. And it's that's not a formula that gets you to the question to ask.
Right.
It's the exact opposite. It's a formula that gets you to a place of relationship with that person, which is the only way that you're really going to help that person. Because I will tell you that from my own experience, judgment never works.
That seems to be an important theme to this whole series, yeah? All right, well, thank you once again for hanging out with us, and feel free to drop some comments or questions if you have them. curiositynotjudgment.com is the website. You can find all the links to where to find us on other platforms, and so we certainly appreciate you going on this journey with us. So have a great rest of your day.
And take care, and try to take care of someone else today.
Indeed.